Is that Hazel?
The trailer got swept downstream with Mama in it, and it ain't just about Mama. I'm seeing these things.
Hey, Hazel.
Who's there?
Up here. You find your mama yet?
When you hear the word Southern Gothic, what are the first thoughts that come to mind? Grotesque, macabre, decay, corruption. You may have come in contact with Southern Gothic media without even realizing it.
When talking about Southern Gothic, many either only hear Southern or only hear Gothic. And while it's important to understand the way that both words influence the genre, Southern Gothic really is an extremely unique form of fiction that is important all on its own.
If you ask some people if they've heard of Southern Gothic or if they know what it is, most of the time they'll tell you no, until you start listing off examples.
I just so happened to have, needless to say, in my time throughout high school and into my adult years, I'd consumed a decent amount of like Southern Gothic media, and typically, media of which that had typically like Black characters and more Black settings, like Eve's Bayou and Their Eyes Are Watching God.
South of Midnight is a new action adventure game from Compulsion Games, set in the decayed town of Prospero, that features dark folktales, deep Southern mythos, and some of the most beautifully haunting creatures you can imagine. Our main protagonist is a young Black female named Hazel, that's my girl, who is on this journey to find her mother, discovering her powers as a weaver. South of Midnight is heavily influenced by the Southern Gothic genre. From the environments, the music, mythos, and creatures, and characters. In some ways, South of Midnight can be used as a medium to refresh and introduce people to Southern Gothic. My name is Brandy, and I'm the founder of Brown Girl Gamer Code, a digital community of women and femmes of color in gaming and technology. We are always looking for ways to amplify and share stories in the gaming industry. When we saw South of Midnight was coming out, we were very excited. It's not often that you see Black female protagonists from the South at that, the lead in a video game. We thought about Southern Gothic and the genre and how people who may be new to it will react. We wanted to make something impactful that could teach players about Southern Gothic and its history and influences as they ventured into South of Midnight for the very first time. Join us for a journey as we venture through the history and roots of Southern Gothic and show how it has influenced South of Midnight. When trying to understand Southern Gothic, you have to look deeply at the history of the Southern United States. As the South's economy thrived in the early 1800s, it sowed the seeds of its own darkness, an atmosphere of inequality, violence, and decay. You had the explosion of the production of cotton, which became the backbone of the economy in the South, where the benefits extended beyond the United States. At the same time, it was at the expense of slave labor, which included unspeakable violence that left generations disenfranchised. It's a world where the past can never be escaped. And these dark legacies became woven into the fabric of the stories told in this region. Historical realities of the South take shape and form through various mediums like hauntings and ghost stories, to shed light on stories left hidden and untold, those that are often unsaid and forgotten. In a broader context, Southern Gothic draws largely from American Gothic tradition, and further beyond that, English Gothic tradition.
So we first start seeing this genre appear in the post-Civil War era of the 19th century. At the same time that there's, of course, a massive cultural shift happening in the southern region of the United States. The earliest stories reflect the changes that are occurring in Southern society as a result of the collapse of the Confederacy and abolition of slavery, and the feelings that are associated with that.
Because of its dark themes and controversial topics, Southern Gothic was often discredited by literary scholars and critics, or at least they tried. Which in terms of the national level comes to no surprise when you think of how this country has continued to try and hide and rewrite its history and painful past, especially in the South. In the early 1800s, Edgar Allan Poe became one of the foundational writers of Southern Gothic, and he, along with William Faulkner, are credited for being amongst the first to fully explore the genre. Even though Poe didn't specifically write about the South, his work embodied key elements of the genre like decay, madness, macabre, like in The Fall of the House of the Usher, and is credited for inspiring future Southern Gothic literature. While Faulkner's writing is more associated with Southern Gothic tradition and exploring the psychological impact of the South's history, especially when it comes to slavery and racism. Some of his work includes A Rose for Emily, The Sound and the Fury, and As I Lay Dying. He is considered the first true writer of Southern Gothic literature. Of course, much like any other industry or history or art form or entertainment in the United States, Southern Gothic stories by Black authors were overlooked. But they still offered a unique variation on Southern Gothic literature. Slave narratives were very prevalent in Southern Gothic literature. Some examples include Charles Ball's 50 Years in Chains that came out in 1859, William Craft's Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom in 1860, and Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl in 1861. So what exactly is Southern Gothic? It's defined as a subgenre of Gothic literature that is also defined by both location and specific themes. Geographically speaking, it's generally set in the southern United States. In terms of themes, it's quite horrifying, eerie, with disturbing themes and images. Decay and corruption are often hidden behind facades that may seem beautiful at first glance, and that is honestly what drew me into it when I first started to learn about it. It sort of depicts the messiness of life and history.
People who engage with the genre will also see many times where the characters and story grapples with how the past can impress upon the present, much like how the South still deals with its legacy and past to this day in almost every aspect of Southern culture and social structures.
Southern Gothic is uniquely rooted in the tension and deviations of the South. After the Civil War, this is when you see the ruins settle in with decaying plantations and mansions, and these locations became unexpectedly popular inspiration and locations for Southern Gothic storytelling. Like I've stated before, there are many people who are not familiar with Southern Gothic. However, the absence of knowing has led to some excitement and interest in South of Midnight.
I am not familiar with Southern Gothic at all, which is why I was very excited and intrigued by South of Midnight. The thing that kind of resonated with me was, again, the Dark Souls genre, because that's like as dark as I'm going to go with any type of gaming. But South of Midnight kind of reinvigorated my confidence in those types of games, because I'm not a spooky gamer girl at all.
So my favorite example of somewhat Southern Gothic culture is in Princess and the Frog. It's not necessarily giving the spooky element besides Mama Juju, but I think it does a really good job of showing a day in the life of a character who lives in the South. She's from New Orleans, which is a wonderful place for learning more about Southern Gothic life and lifestyle and culture. And so that's my favorite fun animated way to step into a Southern Gothic world.
Some of my favorite work of Southern Gothic are movies like The Skeleton Key, Eve's Bayou, and more recently, His House that came out in 2020. In The Skeleton Key, you have a hospice nurse working on a plantation set in New Orleans. In the process of her being nosy, despite being warned multiple times, she finds herself caught up in a spirit-swapping ritual involving former slaves who resided there almost a century ago. It's a great movie, and it absolutely hits the mark when it comes to themes of Southern Gothic. But it also kind of waters down the cultural and spiritual traditions when it comes to hoodoo, to just being two-dimensional, good versus evil. And it was used as a form of resistance against slavery. It's so much deeper than that. And then you have media like Eve's Bayou, who really captures the nuances in those traditions and spiritual practices. Another form of Southern Gothic that I think is often missed is Beyonce's Lemonade album. The imagery of Black women in the South that took us through a journey of sadness, despair, joy, perseverance. It was another example of how Southern Gothic can be used as a medium to tell our stories and our horror stories in our own way. Similar to Gothic literature and media, there's something very unsettling about Southern Gothic. When you see these environments, trees that look like they'll reach out and grab you, covered in moss, fields that seems like they'll go on for days, decaying buildings like old plantation homes and lonely churches, things that feel moody and haunting, but also kind of magical.
I am a huge fan of the Southern Gothic genre. I learned about it during the American Horror Story. I think one of the seasons of American Horror Story really leaned into it. I love when we find a word to describe a thing. But I also realize that a lot of the Southern Gothic kind of theme is just present in the everyday lives of Black Southern folks, Black rural folks. Our houses may not look that great, the foundations might be falling apart, but inside those spaces is so much love and care.
The South is riddled with many cultural traditions, superstitions, and folklore. We were able to chat with the developer team of South of Midnight, in addition to doing our own research to see how Southern Gothic influenced the design and creation of South of Midnight.
We're doing it in a way that's kind of our own twisted version on things. You know, we're not completely authentic to any genres. Let's say it's done in a way that sounds magical. I did a couple of trips. So we went to Nashville, so Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina. We really got to see the communities there, the landscape, obviously really important. So it was like a big research trip we did, which was really inspiring. And we also went down there to meet the performers, and just the music that runs in everyone's blood is just it's incredibly inspiring to be around. I know what I wanted to do was really to kind of ground the South with the soundscape and the ambiences and things like that, so that we had room to, kind of go a little bit off the beaten track, I'd say, with the music to make these original songs. or a couple of interesting little tidbits that we took in the research of the soundscapes of the Deep South. One which was the whippoorwill bird, which I discovered through a colleague, Kevin, who was a member of the narrative team at the time, who mentioned that his grandma, I believe, would always observe a silence whenever she heard the whippoorwill bird sing. It's a night bird. It sings, I think, on every full moon, and I just found that folklore, of this, the whippoorwills signifying that someone's soul was crossing over whenever anyone heard it, and to observe the silence was really interesting and in keeping with the mythology of the game. So we tried to search for these sounds and to integrate them into game.
One of the most unique characteristics of South of Midnight is the stop motion animation. Stop motion animation uses a technique where animation is captured one frame at a time. Physical objects are also moved between frames. When you put everything together and play it back, it gives this illusion of movement. Some of my favorite examples of stop motion animation include classic films like James and the Giant Peach, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and more recently, Jordan Peele's Wendell and Wild. And so, it turns out, Southern Gothic works extremely well with the stop motion animation style.
Southern Gothic just usually has these very big eccentric personalities, so that's a really fun thing to play with when you're designing characters and you're thinking about their story and you're thinking about their visuals. It worked really well in terms of the stop motion look, because with our stylized direction we could push their features and give them sort of all this sort of dark angles and wrinkles and really their look and amplify it. But you could do it in this sort of angular, sculpted way that has all this personality, and it supports their sort of big eccentric personality. So I think that's a Southern Gothic influence that worked really well with the stop motion. And then it's just sort of this undertone of a bit of darkness that is just, it's not, it's a bit of mystery, and everything kind of has a personality. The trees have a personality, the architecture has a personality, the antiques and the old furniture has a personality, and it worked really well with sort of these moodier, darker stories that we were telling.
A subcomponent of Southern Gothic is known as Southern Grotesque. It features characters and creatures that have these physical disfigurements that are meant to symbolize the corruption and repressed realities that lie beneath the facade of normalcy. The grotesque is like a medium to bring to life those hidden, forgotten experiences that are very, very real and oftentimes unjust. It cuts through ideas of normalcy and civility, especially those that are oppressive, exposing the trauma, violence, and pain beneath, blending it together to form a mixed reality. In understanding the way grotesque creatures show up in Southern Gothic and their meaning, one must ponder, how well do they translate into a beautiful game like South of Midnight?
So we really drew from the culture itself. We have a Rougarou, but it was a little bit of our own spin on a Rougarou. We pulled from what exists, and then we kind of built a story around it while trying to respect, the local folktales.
South of Midnight is Hazel's story, but it's also an opportunity for us to experience a perspective that some might relate to and find familiar, and that others might be encountering for the first time. Throughout her journey in this new, dark, and magical world, Hazel encounters unique enemies and creatures that are enmeshed in Southern Gothic folklore. The essence of these creatures is their corruption, which Hazel contends with as she fights them. But they're not just evil for the sake of being evil. These creatures are corrupted by echoes of their trauma, which Hazel parses through with her weaving powers so that she can finally bring them peace. Though these folkloric creatures are otherworldly, their experiences, as well as Hazel's, are anything but. Human experience, or the experience of things that were once human, is at the core of South of Midnight. Heartbreak, loss, grief, social disparity, persecution. South of Midnight doesn't shy away from exploring these themes, instead allowing you to work through them in a productive way, mediated by your stepping into Hazel's shoes and experiencing not only her story, but the rich stories of all the characters she meets. This massive gator goes by the name of Two-Toed Tom. You might have seen him prowling the swamps of Prospero and South of Midnight with a small forest growing on his back, only deterred by the tolling of the church bell. Giant catfish like the one you see here are a long-standing legend in the Deep South. It's said that they live in the deepest, darkest depths of reservoirs and dams too big for a fisherman to ever catch. In South of Midnight, the catfish is seen helping Hazel, even though we can't be too sure of his motivations. If you stay out too late, then Huggin' Molly will creep out from the shadows and whisk you away. The legend of Huggin' Molly is actually based on eyewitness accounts of a tall, lanky woman clad in black wearing a wide-rimmed hat who was sighted repeatedly in Alabama since the 1920s. In South of Midnight, she forgoes her shadowy look in favor of an otherworldly yet colorful appearance, evocative of nature and overgrowth. She looks beautiful, but I still don't think I want to go in for a hug. The Rougarou is essentially a werewolf, but with a southern spin. A Cajun legend stemming from the French Middle Age legend loup-garou, the Rougarou bears many similarities to its wolfish cousin. In the legends, Rougarous are distinctly different from werewolves in one particular way. They haven't completely transformed, and they retain some of their human consciousness and intelligence. And finally, the Haints. These creatures are all over Prospero, and Hazel has to unravel their corruption to truly free them. The legend of the Haint traces back to the Gullah Geechee people of South Carolina and its surroundings. Haints are believed to be spirits of the dead, unable to move on. There is such a rich history surrounding the mythos of the Deep South, with legends and traditions migrating and evolving along with people and being generationally transmitted through oral tradition. And now, through South of Midnight, we get to experience these legends in a transformative way that honors these deeply rooted traditions.
While we know that the origins of Southern Gothic stem from American Gothic and English Gothic literature, as well as the repressed racial tension of the South, the stories told are one-sided. Black people in those early novels are othered, still leaving our realities in the dark. Black writers such as Toni Morrison, Ralph Ellison, Zora Neale Hurston, Richard Wright, and many others challenged that otherness in their work. In Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark, she examines how Black slave bodies were objectified and used as a vessel for the failures and repressed desires of the white American psyche. In addition to that, in Black Southern Gothic literature, you see this transition from supernatural to more realistic elements. Because for Black people in that time period, and even now would say, we experience the very nature of Gothic every day just from our lived experiences. The monsters and hauntings from everyday racism and terror and fear are very real. In most instances, when it comes to Southern Gothic media and literature, there really aren't any happy endings. The absence of hope and the presence of despair, pain, trauma, and hauntings of the past are ever present. But what does that mean for the future of Southern Gothic? Why do these stories always end in this way? And does the pain of the past mean that the future cannot be bright or produce stories of hope? Traditionally, Southern Gothic media and literature leans into complex stories where characters are trying to overcome some form of struggle or trauma. Though impactful, their stories often leave us feeling a sense of sadness and grief. However, South of Midnight is changing that. There's also a historical relevance that makes our lead protagonist being a weaver even more special.
It was originally the creative director's idea to have weaving be the style of the magic in the world. It worked really well with the crafted direction that we wanted to go in because it felt really tactile and it felt grounded. And what I really liked about using textiles and weaving as a foundation inspiration for her magic was that it is traditionally, it's a more of a feminine craft, and we knew we wanted a female protagonist, and it was really neat to think of taking that back and making that something really powerful. She basically uses what we call her objects of station are inspired by weaving tools. So she has a distaff that comes from a weaving loom. She's got these spindles, and then she has these hooks that are like inspired by crochet hooks. So there's a whole like lore behind that in the world about what we call like the grand tapestry, and it's the idea that weavers, who she becomes early on in the game, have this ability to see these fibers and manipulate them, and they have an effect on the world.
From a historical context, Hazel being a weaver provides deeper meaning. Remembering the origins of Southern Gothic and what it meant for African Americans in the South, textile weaving has a direct connection to Black women in the 18th century. Black women weavers are essential to the history of weaving. The success and development of American textile production can be attributed to enslaved Black women, but their contributions were forgotten, of course, due to racism and misogyny. Through the midst of violence and broken families as a result of slavery, Black women were mastering the skill of textile weaving, not only carrying the booming economy of the South, but finding ways to tell their stories and passing along traditions. They translated their stories through their looms, which in many ways is a form of healing. Referred to as the matriarchs of American fabric, Black women and their impact in weaving is resurfacing through Hazel's story in South of Midnight. In finding her mother, Hazel discovers her magical power as a weaver, and I have an even deeper appreciation for her story because it centers a Black girl weaver after being cast aside and forgotten for so long. Though their talents and contributions in textile production were ignored, weaving has been a long-time superpower for Black women. Our ancestors could never have imagined a story like this, one they could relate to and identify with in a form of mainstream media. For many of us, it's deeper than the South.
Macabre and picturesque, the world of Southern Gothic is marked by some pretty heavy themes. Horror, decay, and trauma are often at the center of these stories. It's no wonder so many of them have tragic endings. But what about Southern Gothic in video games? If you've ever played Telltale's Walking Dead series, then you've experienced Southern Gothic through the medium of video games. Death and decay are prevalent in this series, in case the zombies didn't give that away. Some other Southern Gothic games in disguise include Mafia 3, which is set in the Deep South and explores race and class tensions through gritty stories. Red Dead Redemption 2, which is very character-driven, highlighting the stories and hardships of characters who often don't get happy endings. And Resident Evil 7, which we previously mentioned. But South of Midnight already sets itself apart from the Southern Gothic games we've seen before in a number of ways. South of Midnight changes the game by introducing Hazel, a young Black woman at the center of a coming-of-age story, whose life is suddenly flipped upside down when a hurricane sweeps away her house. She loses her home, her mother, and everything she's ever known all in an instant, and she embarks on a journey to regain what was lost and find her mother.
She's a weaver. So she's got this newfound power that as she's looking for her mother, she's, coming into this power. She's learning more about essentially herself and this power, while also and learning about just basically the rest of the world, because, with these weaver abilities essentially comes, this basically ability to see this whole basically side of the world that she didn't know existed.
I think that having this particular character And the way she shows up in South of Midnight is really important for representation, because we know that a lot of times it's important for folks to see themselves be reflected in their media. We know that it sends a powerful message and plays a role in the way we expand our own self-view and our worldview and our ability to shape the world that we live in. And so including a Black woman in the South as a main character and this element of fantasy is really important, because we know we should be sprinkling magic throughout all of our lives. And I'm happy to play a game where we can see an example of that.
If you look at its origins, it's no surprise that Southern Gothic stories featuring Black leads are often overlooked. In general, Black women are underrepresented as video game leads, period. As Javon Gord, a researcher in sociology, informatics, and media studies, points out, Black female leads are not entirely unheard of in video games, but they rarely headline the AAA blockbusters. And though we are slowly making strides in representation, we can't ignore the effects of chronic underrepresentation or misrepresentation of a whole demographic in video games.
Historically, they've taken aspects of Black womanhood, Black girlhood, and they put the things that they put on the screen are the things that are legible, and often the things that are legible are the stereotypical elements, right? You know, we've got the mammy, right? The woman that takes care of everybody, you know, and there's no care or concern for her own self.
Now you just like your grandma, Mrs. Timberlake.
Only I'm not so pretty.
No.
You know, there's the Jezebel, the hypersexualized, you know, Black woman and Black girl. And then you also, you know, Sapphire, the angry Black woman. So we've seen, you know, the big three of the tropes against Black women play out since we've had media. We've gotten into things that mainstream audiences will consume. But we haven't really seen the complex, nuanced kind of stories.
In addition to stories and media that center Black people being undervalued and overlooked, we also have to consider the way we are portrayed in the media, especially Black people in the South. While the concept of monstrosity is prevalent in Southern Gothic, in many ways it has been weaponized and used as a tool for feeding negative stereotypes and fostering misunderstandings.
I don't think the media has ever known what to do, especially like with Black Southern traditions, Black Southern folks, especially when it's like prominent like on your screen. And so the trope that they rely on to make sense of that is monstrosity. And that's one of the cores of like the Southern Gothic, you know, kind of a framework. You know, like it's this monstrous kind of like element. So many people don't realize that, you know, the monstrosity, it's monstrous for people who don't understand our cultures. When people think about like an angry Black woman or a scary Black man creates and it incites fear. So media has like incited this fear based off of, you know, things that they don't really know. Hopefully the game will lean into like some of those like tropes that have been created like around, you know, people like in the Bayou, people in the South, being from Kentucky, all the stereotypes of like, you know, poor white folks like in the Appalachian region, you know, still some of that monstrous, like this other lives here. We don't know anything about their lives or what they do. And this genre kind of gives us like a peek into like their lives.
Modern day writers are continuing to breathe life into Southern Gothic. Thinking of some examples like Wanda Morris's Anywhere You Run or Jesmyn Ward's Salvage the Bones, Black people are continuing to tell our stories and making it known that the South is for us too. And understanding the complicated relationship this genre has with how it's represented in the media, South of Midnight is offering a much needed, refreshing perspective, weaving a new path in Southern Gothic media.
Hazel's story is very much infused in the deep, rich themes and aesthetics of Southern Gothic. The Hazel story isn't about despair, it's about hope. It's about Hazel as a person, as a young Black woman, and as a daughter, and how she traverses not only her own trauma, but how she helps to make others whole again.
We talked a lot about like some of the darker influences, but I would say that really our game is a game of hope, and it's a positive story, and our character is a really wonderful, positive character, and like very dynamic and multidimensional, but at the same time, you know, it's not bleak in the way that we talked about a lot of the influences at all. It's very much more on the like adventure folktale beauty. There's an element of hope.
Hazel stays true to herself. Hazel maintains essentially her heart, and she does not let the things that are happening around her, the things that she is being faced with, sour her heart or turn her into something that she doesn't want to be, a type of person that she does not want to become, somebody that is, fueled by rage or hate or whatever else. And I really hope that people are able to, see that in Hazel and, or, can maybe apply that to real life and see that even throughout the things that you experience, the hardships, the grief, everything that we encounter, the trauma, the pain, that we can still maintain our hearts and maintain kindness and empathy and consideration for others and still stay true to ourselves while also trying to help people.
Southern Gothic stories are interesting because they're really bleak. Like you live rough, you die rough. Generally, no one is like happy at the end of a Southern Gothic tale, and so we do have elements of that. There also are usually supernatural elements in them. I think what Midnight did, we do have those darker elements. We deal with some really heavy topics. We have those magical aspects, obviously, with the creatures and the folktales. But I think South of Midnight, we're not telling like a pure Southern Gothic story. We don't want it to feel nihilistic or like hopeless to end the way you often feel when you finish a Gothic piece of literature, media. There is some hopefulness in Midnight that I think is really important to distinguish itself in that way.
Speaking of Hazel being on this journey to find her mom, the focus and portrayal of motherhood in video games is another way that South of Midnight is changing Southern Gothic media for the better. We're playing through a story where the relationship between a Black girl and her mother is front and center, and it's one of strength, love, and positivity. It's showing how sacred motherhood is, and we're getting that in a video game.
We don't often see motherhood, present like in games. So even though it's not showing like her mom, the motherhood, like narrative is there. I think motherhood is like on the periphery, and then what Hazel and, what this game does is put it front and center. And what that does for us, cause motherhood, motherhood is healing, motherhood is nature, motherhood is care. There's like all these, like this ethic of care that's just present like inside that. And so just in that small little trailer that we saw, all those things were present. So it just really got me excited.
In South of Midnight, there's so much to look forward to and explore. On a deeper level though, what does this game mean to the players? And what do the developers hope players understand and consider as they play through Hazel's story?
I think the most important thing that gamers should be taking from South of Midnight is that these experiences are real. These situations, these journeys are happening all the time, and there are things that we can relate to in each of the video game characters that we play with. We just have to be willing to see it through their eyes and understand their story a little bit better and find the places where we can connect with them. So I think the one thing that is most important to take from a video game like this is that their stories are powerful and that we have the ability to shape stories of our own and bring others along with us.
A big thank you, because this is something that's fresh, it's new to me, and it could be fresh and new to a lot of other people, especially with me being a lifelong gamer. It's exciting to see something like this kind of come into the industry and to be introduced to the market. So thank y'all so much for thinking and picking up this story. Thank y'all so much for developing this story and giving us a character that looks like us.
Anything that I would want to share with the developers of the game, first just sending gratitude, sending thanks. I'm thankful that they had the audacity to create something like this, that they weren't deterred by things that are happening in the world, especially with like a previous game that featured a Black woman prominently, didn't do well in the mediated space. That didn't scare them, that they didn't shy away from that. The anti-DEI world that we're in, they could have easily scrapped it and said, no, we're not going to do that. We better do something else because nobody wants this diversity stuff anymore. They stayed committed to it, so I thank them for that.
So I would just like them to have fun playing the game, like explore the environment, like listen to the songs we created, and maybe if they fancy it, like make your own cover of the song. I'd love to hear if people are inspired to make music in the game or outside the game. So excited to see what people think.
Go into the game with an open mind. I really hope you guys like Hazel. I hope you appreciate the work that like everyone on the team did. And again, I think it's a game for everyone. It's a very human game. And I hope people enjoy it and that it resonates with people somehow.
I hope you guys love South is Midnight as much as we do. And I hope you guys are able to take something meaningful and impactful from the game.
And if it's resonating with them and if they find it meaningful, like there's no feeling to that. So thank you for being interested in the game, and we're really excited that other people they're as excited as we are about South of Midnight.
It's been a ride, but our journey through Southern Gothic must come to an end for now. We've looked at its origins and historical influences, how it differs culturally, and explored how South of Midnight is pushing the boundaries and traditions of the genre. While I'm a huge fan of the horror elements of Southern Gothic, I'm looking forward to experiencing fresh perspectives and endings. So thank you, Hazel, for weaving us a new path.